Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this conversation today, wherever in the world it is you're joining us from. Welcome, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, or you're playing this back later. We're very glad that you could participate and be with us. My name is Rich Fernandez from the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and I'm joined by our special guest, our friend, the chair of our board, professor of law, thought leader and practice leader, Rhonda Magee. Welcome, Rhonda.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
Today's conversation is really, the topic that we're going to focus on is really how to navigate difficult times, how to cultivate peace in troubled times. And before we dive into that topic, for those of you that are not familiar with SIYLI, which is the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, our acronym is SIYLI, S-I-Y-L-I. I just wanted to share a little bit with you and then invite you to a practice that is something we do very often around here. So just for context, SIYLI, the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, is a nonprofit organization. We are a global community focused on making mindfulness and compassion and emotional intelligence practical and accessible around the world. And so in that sense, we exist as an educational institute, and we have a global community in running programs in over 50 countries around the world and reaching people in many more. So welcome wherever in the world it is you're joining us from. Like I said, part of our mission is to make mindfulness practical and accessible. And one way we like to do that commonly in our programs, in the way we work together, is to invite people who participate in our work to practice certain aspects of mindfulness. So right at the beginning of our call here, we'd like to offer an invitation. It's an invitation to practice something we call a minute to arrive. And this, if you're not familiar with this, it's a very simple practice of just allowing your mind and heart and body to arrive all together in the same moment. And if that sounds a little abstract, we have an easy way to do that, which is to just invite you, if you like, if it's comfortable, to close your eyes or to just soften your gaze and take a minute here all together with us on this call to just become aware of your body and your breath. And we'll do this in silence for about a minute, and then I'll invite us back to rejoin. So please join us if you'd like for a minute to arrive together. Thanks. And as we bring this brief practice to a close, I just invite you to take one final, slightly deeper, nourishing breath. And as you're ready, rejoining the group, thanks for your attention, for your kind attention. And I'd like to invite us now to really engage in this topic. So by way of the flow of our time together, Rhonda and I were thinking about having a conversation together just to start to kind of frame the topic and start to explore it. And then for about half the time, we would really invite you all, the participants, to send in questions. And you can do this via the chat. So just send in your questions via chat. I further like to invite you, when you do that, if you have a question to submit, tell us your name and also tell us where you are located in the world, because we know this is a global call and we just want to make sure we know where everyone's from. So if you'd like, submit questions via chat. But we'll start off with a conversation with my dear friend and our board chair, Rhonda Magee. For those of you that don't know Rhonda, she is a thought and practice leader in our space of mindfulness and compassion practices, really working at a global scale. Professor of law at University of San Francisco, writing prolifically on social justice issues. A wonderful book coming out this fall, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. So look out for that. 3 weeks from now, I think it's coming out. And we're so blessed to have Rhonda as our special guest today, and generally as our chair of the board of directors here at SIYLI. So again, Rhonda, welcome. So great to see you here today. Yeah.
It's wonderful to be in this community with you all and with your friendship and your leadership. Really, it's just always inspiring to me, Rich. And I'm so glad that in this moment, again, we're seeing another manifestation of it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are a community, I mean, that is a critical thing about how we try to accomplish the work here. If we're really focusing on mindfulness, compassion, emotional intelligence, we're trying to do that together as a community. And in particular for today's call, I think so many of us around the world, wherever we're located, are experiencing some real challenging times. Certainly, there's also wonderful things happening, but there's also some real difficulties playing out. Rhonda and I are based here in the United States. We're having a lot of challenges here around racial, cultural, political division that is so painful. In other parts of the world, it might be about governance, or if you look at the UN report on climate change, something that affects us all, there's quite dire data coming out about the state of our global climate. So wherever in the world you're located, whatever the challenges you may be experiencing, what we're hoping to do today is think about how to cultivate peace, really from the inside out. Peace for ourselves, a sense of balance, perhaps even optimism, as we confront these global and local challenges. And again, I really want to frame the idea of a challenge broadly here. So it doesn't even have to be something on a global scale. It could be really near and really close to home, something that's experienced near, that you're experiencing in your life, in your relationships, in your work, whatever challenge you may be experiencing. Again, global, local, personal. What are some ways that we can skillfully navigate those challenges and cultivate a sense of peace and well-being? And Rhonda and I were talking yesterday, and Rhonda, I think you had a really beautiful way to frame this in the biggest picture, which around how perhaps the perspective we can take on the challenges, the nature of some of challenge itself. So maybe I'd just invite you to share a little bit about your perspective on this topic with our participants.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Rich. If I recall, when this part of our reflection that we had yesterday, this rich pre-conversation we had yesterday, I believe you were sharing, and I'll invite you to maybe add a little bit more to this, but I think you were sharing about how some of us are feeling the real challenge of holding our seat, feeling our way into a sense of well-being and confident capacity to stay in these difficult conversations with each other from different perspectives and backgrounds, when especially sometimes we feel we might be physically threatened. We might ourselves not be safe. Am I capturing part of it, Rich? You want to add anything there?
Yeah, absolutely. How do we engage when when it's scary, unsafe, when perhaps we feel like there's no compromise from the other side? So what is a skillful way to think about this and then to engage?
Yeah. Whew. And I mean, as you say it again just now, it just lands as such a very real touchstone I'll just say for myself. This time that we're in is challenging on a very, very deep level. And any one of us, no matter how practiced we are, can really feel pulled off of our seat of the sense of, let's say, groundedness, even in instability, which can arise from deep practice. We realize that things are changing all the time around us. And yet, the cultivation of mindfulness is for many of us a cultivation of a sense of like ability to kind of be with these changes in a way that keeps us coming back to a sense of at home. And yet it's really hard, really, really hard right now, especially when, you know, we are pushed beyond our sense of our comfort zone, and we're pushed really into the sense of triggered reactivity that comes when we actually feel some physical sense of threat or fear, and that is happening more and more around us. And for me, there are so much about how it is we want to turn with real robustness to really be able to meet what's really arising, like, so not bypassing. You're not, this is not a place where we get into Pollyanna. Mindfulness means, right, we don't feel it, we don't see it, we're just somehow rising above it. We're here. We're human beings in this together. And so the question for me is, how can we both recognize what we're dealing with and have some compassionate way of sitting with the realities we feel and all that comes up, all the emotions, all the scary thoughts, but not get stuck there, right? How can we enable a way of both turning toward those realities, but also seeing that there's always more than whatever it is, no matter how intense it is, and even how physically threatening, perhaps even unto death. We all know that we have a period of time on this earth. It will not last forever. So how can we, as we navigate all of that, stay present to the potential for releasing into joy, releasing into connectedness, despite the feeling of fear? And for me, in my own practice and with the teachers that I work with, it's becoming clearer and clearer to me that what we're called to do is address what I see as a poverty of imagination. And we talked about this yesterday, yes, right? There's really a poverty of imagination. How, yes, we need each other from these places of our own particular positions and experience. But our own limited positions and experiences are just, as we know, just one part of the reality that we're living, one part of what might be called the truth of our lives. So it seems to me that there's a real question. How do we get so narrowly stuck around the peace that is very, very present to us, such that we can't really even almost imagine the world in which, through meeting at our places of vulnerability, we can feel our common humanity. We can feel the pain that we're all feeling in different ways. We can imagine ourselves in increasingly broad circles of concern and compassion and connection. We can see that my pain is tied to yours in some way, as a woman, as a whatever it is. I'm part of this continuum of life, and we do influence each other. And so, yeah, mindfulness, I think, can help us occupy a spaciousness within our pain, through which we can actually really, and again, it is a bit of an act of the imagination, you might say, but I do think we've imagined ourselves into these narrow boxes. We can sort of open that up and I think see, right, from within that space of abundance of imagination, abundance of life, that we are always inherently connected, even as we struggle.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's so profound, this idea that we're suffering from a poverty of imagination, an imagination around our common humanity, against the, about the things that, that allow us to see what's possible and to be vulnerable at the same time. Because, it seems to me that what we're experiencing in that poverty of imagination is an abundance of fear, of a sense of scarcity, of, otherness, of like this, again, failure to imagine that we actually share a common humanity, a common planet, that we're all interconnected.
Mm.
And that narrative around fear and scarcity and otherness seems to be predominating in so many parts of the world. Again, we're based in the US. We see this abundantly here in some of the immigration debates and some of the debates around, white supremacy and race and privilege. But we also see it around other parts of the world in governance models, in the nature of democracy and in whatever struggles are being faced. It seems like, as you said, it's a poverty of imagination. So I think one really challenging thing is, how do we overcome that negativity bias?
Yes.
It's evolutionary in us, right? As a species, it helped us survive. It helped us monitor threats and respond appropriately or react to them as needed. But it seems to predominate. And so what's a skillful way then to exercise our imagination? If poverty imagination is the problem, like you said, which it's so poetically said and so poignant, then how do we inhabit a place where we have more imagination,
Yeah.
a sense of this common humanity and connection?
Right. And the abundance that
Mm-hmm.
comes from just being alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, that's a question. I mean, it's not necessarily rhetorical, right? I have some thoughts, but what can we do,
What can we do? Let's jam on that, because I think that's why we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think what we're doing is one example. I see this kind of conversation as an example of interpersonal mindfulness, frankly. And it's very, very important. So, of course, our practices begin with a commitment to personal, taking the time out, doing the work on our own. But I think part of the reframing is around recognizing the extent to which we often individualize and personalize what we're going through, and also the pathway out. The pathways out, the practices that support us are multifaceted, and they include certainly interconnected experience like this one, right? The fact that we're in this conversation together, the fact that we've all come together to take some time. This is a practice. We can do a version of this wherever we are. And we can begin through just the time that we devote to being together with awareness, being together in conversations that apprehend just really the largeness of both the sense of challenge and struggle, but also of our hearts and our sense of care for each other and our sense of care for the planet and the moment that we're in. So creating spaces like this, I think, is its own kind of practice, not to be minimized or missed, right? Mm-hmm. Creating the will, the intentionality of creating spaces where we can come together is an important piece of it. And coming together with our practices as a very consciously foregrounded and base of support. And then I think really seeing all of the things that we're trained to deliver through Search Inside Yourself, through this beautiful set of practices. To me, it's a question really of just seeing that all of the practices that we've been engaging in, teaching, sharing, experiencing, each of them potentially can help us out here. Any one of them. So the moment of arriving, it's a moment of arriving right back home to this sense of for me, for example, sense of myself. Obviously, in the United States, this kind of packaging, kind of meaning the embodiment that is, Rhonda, born in a world, 1967, in the southern part of the United States, right? Some particular placedness it matters, I think. So I think it matters to sort of name that, whatever it is that we are, if you will, in these conventional identity spaces, is constructed from particular places and spaces. And so, yes, in the US, there's a whole lot of meaning making around the kind of embodiment that you see when you look at me. It's gendered in a certain way, right? So I'm gendered as a woman. people have this idea of race. I didn't create it. Born into this world where all that was being made, and histories all around that, culture all around. So people look at me in the US and they see a Black woman, maybe cisgendered woman. We're understanding that term to distinguish transgendered, if you will, of a certain age, petite and frame, all of that, right? And meanings coming from a certain part of the US. So I'm aware that as I move through the world, that kind of identifying, signifying, if you will, is being done around me, whether, no matter what I think of myself, however broadly I want to think of myself, beyond the boxes. People meet me in a world in which, as you pointed out so beautifully, Rich, our brains, our cultures have kind of taught us that to the degree these identities are relevant in our world, we have to pay attention out of, just our own well-being and just to take care of ourselves in conventional world. So with all of that happening, if we can have practices that help us to see that that is part of our experience, but not find ourselves stuck or limited there, because at the same time, we are here sharing a planet, right? So this particular location that I named, whether it's the southern United States or now San Francisco where I live, it is in fact right now in the heavens. Right now also part of a global world without boundaries. So if I'm only stuck in this idea of who I am that is given to me by conventional society, I'm missing a lot. And so that moment of arriving, if we can let that moment just be a moment to say, I'm here, sensing into the fact that I'm on this beautiful planet we call the Earth, right now, a fiery inferno beneath us, but that we're sharing through the grace of this environment that can hold us all in this moment. All of that is true here. And a moment to arrive, even a second, can be a moment to kind of just allow some awareness of all of that to be there. Mm-hmm. That's just one example, but there's so many. I wrote a book partly to help us see lots of different ways that the practices that we engage. RAIN, the RAIN practice, an acronym, teaching acronym many of us know. Recognize, A for accept or allow, right? What is here? Investigate what is here. That I, and investigating in the RAIN practice, can be another practice for really deepening. All right, there's a moment where anyone, right now, we might get caught in this narrow sense of our identities. For some reason, somebody has made a statement that makes us uncomfortable. A microaggression has been raised, or a slur was just uttered, and we're all thinking, whatever it might be. The temptation to get stuck or caught. And investigating in the RAIN acronym can help us see, oh, here I'm feeling fear, I'm feeling a sense of anxiety, frustration, anger, rage, whatever it is. Allowing ourselves to really investigate what else is there. Okay, some fear. What else is there? A thought that I might not be seen or cared for here or safe. What else is there? Actually, I am safe. Actually, I'm a part of this universe that really is beyond real words, that supports us with the breath, oxygen, this environment that we didn't create that is hospitable to our being for the moment, even with climate change. So just, again, there's so many, and so recognize, accept, investigate can be an opportunity to kind of come back home and find that capacious, imagine, and imagination is a tough word because we think that means it's not real. It actually is real. It's just, you could say, a poverty of framing. We just haven't framed our experience with a broad enough envelope. And so there are many, many ways, I think, that our practices can support us in that reframing. And then RAIN, of course, is RAIN, in the last one, non-identifying or nurturing. Sometimes our teaching communities are shifting to add non-attachment. That means whatever arises as we use the RAIN practice, not to make a new story of that. Like, okay, I'm just this big, expansive envelope. I'm not able to then meet you, Rich, when you say, hey, I'm feeling pain because my background as a, a man with a multicultural background in this space I'm feeling somehow disregarded somehow. If I can't meet you because I'm all the way bypassed up into, but Rich, remember, we're all part of a global. Sometimes I need to be able to pause and meet you right where you are and hear you. So it's that flow. It's not getting stuck anywhere. And if I can meet you again, Rich, where you are in your pain, then again, both of us can open up again. So that's to me what we're called to do. To
Beautiful.
Dynamic engagement around it.
Yeah, in fact, I would like to invite us, because you did mention the RAIN practice. And so perhaps I'd like to invite, if you would be up for it, to share with our listeners, to the community, a way to actually practice RAIN, which, as you were saying, is a metaphor: recognize, accept, investigate, and be non-attached. But what is the experience of this type of this mindfulness practice? Perhaps we can go directly into that experience ourselves. And I would invite, if you're not familiar with this practice, it is a form of mindfulness practice. It's called the RAIN practice. As we've been talking, we've been talking about, you use the word signifiers, our context, cultural, social, racial, political, all of these signifiers that tend to kind of form what we consider our identity or the identity of others. We kind of relate to each other as a set of signifiers. So I wonder if we could also perhaps think about how, or work with RAIN to kind of, as you say, kind of expand our imagination beyond those kind of limiting signifiers of identity, my own or that of the other. Yes. Is that making sense? I think that practice might be a nice way to to work with that.
Yeah, let's do it just for a few minutes. And of course, again, we could do more if we had more time, but in the interest of just giving us a taste and then opening this up.
Yeah.
Let's take a moment to pause in this very moment, wherever we are. And as we breathe in and out, as we feel our embodiments in this moment, maybe call to mind a moment of suffering that you have experienced around some notion of your own identity, perhaps somebody else's notion of your identity, or some way in which you've tried to connect with someone and maybe assumptions, one either that you held or they held, somehow got in the way. So just create a moment to see what arises as I say these words as an example in your own body and being, something you know about the suffering that happens in the world or can happen around identity. Something you felt, something you've noticed. With gentleness and loving kindness, perhaps not the most painful thing, but just a touchstone in this moment. How has identity landed in your life? How have you either witnessed or experienced in yourself suffering? So if we recognize that we know a little bit about how identity can create suffering, we're creating now this awareness, the recognition. Maybe it's about race, gender. Maybe it's about religion. Maybe it's about immigration status. It can be any of a number of things. Recognize it. Accepting. Pausing, taking a deep breath, allowing some spaciousness to really just be with for the moment what you know about this. So what is coming up? What do you know? Do you know something about the emotions that you feel? Is there grief, sadness, frustration, anger, rage? Really creating some spaciousness for allowing yourself to feel what you feel, know what you know. And now moving into the I, investigating a little bit more. if there is grief or sadness or anxiety, fear, really, what is that? Are there thoughts associated with those feelings? Where do you feel that in the body? Sense into where you feel it in the body. And then as you sense into where you feel it in the body, what's that feeling? What are some of the words you would place around it? Some tightness in the chest, some hollowness in the belly, some sense of groundlessness, coolness that comes with fear, or heat that comes with anger. Where do you feel it in the body? How can you describe it? How can you let it live in you for this moment, for now? And now as you breathe in and out, what else is here? What else is here? And we feel the peace, perhaps, of spaciousness as you breathe in and out, and sense what else is here in your experience. It could be more difficulty. Create some awareness, allow that. Or you could be moving into a sense of the joy in connecting around this, the easefulness that comes from allowing yourself to feel what you feel, name what you can name, owning what you own in terms of your experience. So breathing in and out and seeing what else is here. Holding yourself all the while with kindness, with compassion, with sensitivity to the difficulty you've seen in this world. And now again, although we could stay here, let's move for the purposes of our time together into the N of non-identification, non-attachment. What we're experiencing now is just experience. And there will be another experience in the next fresh, unrepeatable moment. And can we be open to the next experience, even as we are not afraid to name what we're feeling right now? So non-attachment, non-identification, and also nurturing, holding ourselves with kindness, holding our experience with kindness, expanding the sense of concern to everybody else on the call right now, even as we hold ourselves. Breathing in and out, and as we breathe out, breathing out the wish for well-being that extends, as I extend it to my friend Rich in this moment, and now to each and every other person on this call. And invite, as we settle a little bit more into breathing in and out, the sense that right now, can we receive the wish for well-being that is right in this moment being extended to each of us. I feel it from me, from myself, and from those who are extending it in ways that can actually touch me in this moment. Sensing into the quality of that, a willingness to feel others' wishes for our well-being. And as we move through this, inviting, in whatever ways we can, moving out of this practice and back into engagement, this interpersonal practice of being together with these big questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we actually have a question about this practice, and I think it's a good time. We're actually halfway through the webinar to invite any participants who might also have a question about this or any topic related to this, this notion of cultivating peace in troubled times, to just go ahead and chat that in to us. And, we're keeping an eye on that and can kind of speak to those questions. But there is one question about the RAIN practice, Rhonda, especially it has to do with that last piece, which is N, non-identification or non-attachment. So this question is from a participant who says, does the N part of the process mean pause and meet the other person where they are and then move forward with a more expansive community feeling? So is that part of it? Like, how do you work with the N, especially interpersonally?
Yeah, it's beautiful. So again, as we ask these questions, to me, we stay in a space of inquiry to recognize how it is that the brain and the body forms these questions. And really the invitation is to kind of allow our practice and our engagement with these experiences to help inform our answers as we go. So what is it like, to be present with another human being around these painful realities? We may have had a conversation recently that is part of what is informing that question. And my own feeling is human engagement, that I, thou that Martin Buber talks about, that can happen, the beautiful way in which we can experience our common humanity and our interconnectedness in these moments of connection around the painful truths of our lives. They don't reduce to formulas in terms of how we meet them. So we might stay right there present to whatever it is that needs to be revealed and met for as long as we need to be there. So if somebody is describing, how they've been made vulnerable, suffered a crime or an injury, the idea is not to just immediately, again, move away from it into that big expansive space, but just to be there for as long as your heart tells us that kind of presence-based, loving listening might be called for. And I say this in this way because I'm also thinking now about the deep teaching of, I'll say for me, Buddhist teachings that underlie for me mindfulness. The Heart Sutra, just to name it. Again, this is not going to be about deep dive into Buddhism. But to me, a lot of my teaching and training around this is coming from and flowing out of deep teachings around the way in which both form and emptiness, or identity and spaciousness, are all one aspect, different doorways into the same experience. So to me, being with someone in their discussion of their identity is another example. It's just another experience of a kind of formlessness. It's hard. So that both and is a little bit of where we are sitting in practice. What does the both and feel like for you may be very different from what it feels like for me. I hope this is a way of answering this question that helps. Yeah. But it's like realizing that, it's not like when you're in this conversation about identity, you're trying to quickly move into, the higher, more evolved conversation that wants to be had about spaciousness. It's like, can we feel the spacious, true, infinite humanity in that story about how identity is causing harm right now? Mm-hmm. That's, to me, the question.
Yes. It's a much more expansive way to see another person. It's beautiful. And one of our participants actually said that was a really deep and interesting answer. So thank you for that. We actually have another participant who has another question. This is Dom, and we can actually unmute you, Dom. So if you could just tell us also where you're joining us from, and then we can actually hear you now. So please go ahead and offer your reflections or questions. Dom, go ahead, please. And unmute yourself too, please. I think you're on mute. Dom, are you there? I see you're on mute, so we can't hear you.
Right. Is there any way we can help with the unmuting, or is that
no, unfortunately not. So, Dom, if you can unmute yourself or type your question into chat, that would be helpful. Okay, maybe he's not on the line anymore. Dom, if you are on the line, please go ahead and just type it into chat, and we'll just kind of continue on. This idea of, we've touched on it in this last section, and in this idea of perhaps seeing more possibilities in interacting with another person. And it seems to me that that's so critical, because it's so easy for us to just be dismissive potentially, if I could just be frank, right? Especially when we feel like there's somebody on the other side who actively is perhaps disparaging or isn't approaching you from that same broader perspective of things, and may actively be wishing you harm, right? Or if not physical harm, ill will. And they're really kind of dug in, right? So in the United States, we see this in our political environment, but I know globally, no matter what difference you may be confronting, different governance models, different parties, different views on socioeconomics, environmental policy, whatever it might be, even genders and any sort of difference that we encounter with somebody, where both parties aren't meeting on this common ground of a more expansive view of and a willingness to engage, the complexities of the difference, that seems so challenging to work with, right? How do you, if I'll just use an example here from the United States because it's relevant, like if, you're confronting somebody who has a very explicit view, let's say, about your race or your immigration status, right? And you're having very opposing views. I'm not even necessarily taking one side or the other, but it seems both sides have very, very, very concrete views.
Yes.
The question and the challenge really is then how to engage somebody who is not meeting you on that common ground.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Rich. Because in fact, we all know we are meeting a world where we're engaging with people from very different places, some of whom have some practice as a support, many of whom don't necessarily, or may have some other kind of practice that doesn't necessarily support this kind of holding of experience. I was actually privileged to be in Canada earlier this year at a conference for federal employees in the Canadian government on compassionate leadership. And one of the pieces of advice that I think dovetails with my own teaching and practice around this was really, first of all, it's very, very important for us to, if we need, so there's a couple things. If we know we definitely are maybe physically threatened, that's real. Take steps to protect ourselves. We don't necessarily have to sacrifice fully our physical, embodiment to, for the purposes of, being in the most heated conversation we can find. I don't think we're saying that. Take care of yourself, right? We all deserve the basic sense of care and concern for ourselves that supports dignified holding of our desire to continue to live another day. Okay, so that said, many of the times we're not in quite that much of a sense of physical threat. It's just a kind of a moment of like difference of opinion that we are holding in a certain kind of way. And there, I think the invitation, again, going back to what we discussed and shared in Canada, there's one bit of information or teaching about just recognizing, even as we are getting very tightly constricted around a view of what should happen or how somebody else should meet us, that it might be useful to always have a little bit of spaciousness around the thought that I could be wrong here. Even, those of us who feel we're so deeply practiced and we kind of know what is right and what's called for. But in terms of how we're hearing another person, or in terms of what we see as the possibility for connection or common understanding, and the sense that we might have that, wow, we really are just completely on the opposite sides here. If as we meet a person in our being and body, we can just hold some little bit of space for, what if I'm not quite fully seeing all that there is to be seen here either. That's just one tool or one invitation. I also think of the work of Byron Katie. Some of you may be familiar with her work, in which her work constantly invites a place of little bit of inquiry, especially when we get in our conventional conversations and get in those places of like, here's a position I want to take and I really feel like this is the right one. Just pausing creating some spaciousness coming from our mindfulness practices for holding the possibility that, how do I, to ask the question, as I'm judging another person, what's my judgment? How do I know that to be the full truth? Or what if it's not, what if the opposite is true? What if that thought I have about this person is, let's just imagine the exact opposite might be true. Where would I be without the thought I'm really attaching to that this is what this other person needs to think, be, or do right now? Where might we be if without that particular thought running in through me right now? And again, this is not to say you abandon your positions or, you know, but it's a way of holding. Does this make any sense? This idea that we can both, and again, this is mindfulness. To me, this is the high grade PhD program in applied mindfulness. It's like, yes, I'm going to stay with the sense of what I believe is the position I want to take here. And at the same time, inhabit that sense of that position and make the argument for it if I need to. But do it from a place that allows some some sense of the spaciousness that comes from the kinds of inquiries I've named to also be in the conversation. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to necessarily agree with the person. You don't have to abandon your position, as you said. And there's still that possibility, I think, of recognizing what we call common humanity. But I think the way I understand that is that knowing that there are causes and conditions for all of us that cause us to be where we're at, and seeing that bigger picture. And whether or not, and I love your point about, how do we know we're right? Because our job isn't to necessarily convince the other person we're right? In that difficult dynamic, that's not always a productive course, but understanding the bigger picture, the causes and conditions that arise, that cause this set of conditions to arise in which this person is staking this claim, can be very beneficial as a practice, I think, for ourselves, to see that broader picture, to see that common humanity, and to find some other productive ways to approach the situation, whether it's through direct engagement or not. Right? I loved your point about it's important to be safe. It's important to have a sense of wholeness and well-being. And if it's too disruptive or difficult to engage, maybe there's some other avenues. It's not to abandon engagement, but it's to find the skillful means with that broader perspective. So I think it does make sense. Hopefully I was able to encapsulate that.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah. But I love Rich, I love the way you're pointing to, again, causes and conditions that are always present. And again, true for ourselves, true for each other. To me, this is a constant invitation into deeper compassion. And it may sometimes, as you say, require that we just recognize when we're wanting more to be right than to be connected. And sometimes it's just pausing and just saying, I might not be, I've used this phrases like this. The words I'm speaking might not actually be the ones that are enabling you to hear me, but I want you to know that underneath this is a desire to stay in connection with you. So speaking to your motivation, I really want to stay in conversation and connection with you. I realize that the particular words might not be the ones that are facilitating that, but can I turn toward you and let you know that my desire is to stay in connection with you? And maybe we need to pause for right now.
Right.
So there are those kinds of things you can do to help facilitate moving forward.
Absolutely.
There's a question here, Rich, about...
Yeah, I see that from Dom. So I'll come back to that in just a second, because Dom, we did receive your question. So I just wanted to end this portion of it because we do have a really great comment here from another panelist, participant, Lynette. So thank you for this, Lynette, emphasizing the importance as well of staying safe and having a sense of well-being for one's own self as we engage these conversations, as we engage and confront, perhaps very different worldviews or challenges.
Yes.
So absolutely emphasizing that point about being safe and taking care of yourself.
Because violence is real right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been real.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are at a moment where it's so, especially again in the United States. And to speak about what's happening where we are in the United States is not a way of really crowding out the conversations that we hope we are helping support wherever you are about where this conversation needs to go to really create a more lively, grounded engagement with the parts of this conversation that are more true where you are. It is simply to say that we see deep value in just naming what's happening here as a way of really opening you all up and all of us up to that courageous, like, okay, it's not quite that here, but what is here is this. And then deepening that conversation where you are. But certainly in the US, as we all know, the prevalence of guns and other, narratives and sort of ways of encouraging violence, frankly, in our time. There's a real threat when we speak to these issues. And so really allowing our intuition about safety to inform what we're doing, and recognizing too that the threat is possibly there for any one of us. We've seen that privileged identities, if you will, do not protect people necessarily if somebody else wants to harm them.
And no matter, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It's true, right? I mean, so stepping up to be an ally can make a person in the United States right now just as vulnerable as the person you would want to be stepping up to support. And so this is not to say we shouldn't be supporting each other. And it is actually instead to say, grounded in a deeper, more confident sense of like what we're up against, but also what we bring, what we can do together, more so than by ourselves, creating networks of support, because together we can accomplish so much. We have a great, great power, and the power that we're talking about using to counteract these difficult things is not just individual, as we was coming back to that point earlier, so much more powerful when we're together to change.
Yes. And this is true no matter where you are in the world, whether it's here in the United States or Hong Kong or Venezuela or Afghanistan or wherever you're facing right now, this type of challenge. So thank you. Thank you for addressing that. And then I know we only have a few minutes left, and so we did get Dom's question via chat. So I would like to just pivot to that. Perhaps this will be the last question we can talk about. And really, I'll read it out. I think it's a question about kind of the work context, especially that we are operating in. So Dom asks, is the challenge of the corporate world and how to be mindful in that type of environment, which seems to be operating at the speed of light. So yeah, how do we bring mindfulness into that, to a context in which, and if you don't mind, I'll start in on this question, on the answer to this, because I think it's not only a question of things are moving so quickly, but it's also what is being prioritized, right? So if you think about publicly traded companies, really kind of creating shareholder value add for the longest time, and still today, is kind of the primary driver of purpose and of operations in a corporate kind of environment. So how do we bring this notion of common humanity, that actually a corporation is not a person, as somebody mistakenly said once, but it is made up of people. Organizations are made up of people. All of us have this common humanity. All of us have joined together. So how do we practice mindfulness in that setting that seems to have such different goals than human? Not always. There are lots of organizations that also prioritize human flourishing. But if we think about human flourishing in a corporate context especially, do those two go together? How can they go together? How can we bring mindfulness into that type of setting? And that's a big part of the work we do here at the Institute, actually, right? And I'll offer my perspective, and then Rhonda, of course, please offer yours, which is we really try to bring practices that bring that common humanity, that experience of first of all, connecting with your own felt experience, knowing how to do that, knowing how to connect with your mind, heart, body, intention as you show up every day for work, throughout the day, and then knowing how to connect with others and kind of seeing that kind of common human flourishing. That can actually be accomplished through a set of practices that aren't even necessarily that formal or that involved. You can do it throughout the course of your day. And so we teach things like a minute to arrive. We teach things like micro practices where we pivot to connection, where we cultivate just the soft eyes of seeing another person and taking their perspective and empathizing with them. And it's just seeing differently. And we don't have time to dive into those practices now, but I would just offer that mindfulness and empathy and compassion are all skills. And like any skill, they can be cultivated in any moment, and they can be strengthened and they can grow. And you can do that in a corporate environment as well, to your question, Dom. And when you start to do that yourself, things around you start to change. So that's our aspiration. But Rhonda, I don't know if there's any last things you'd like to offer there as well.
I think what you just said is just so well said, Rich. I really think it beautifully encapsulates what it is that your whole program, our whole program, seeks to present and offer to the world. A way that these practices can be not only personal resources, right? They can help us build our personal inner resources for dealing with these challenges, but they're outer resources that, again, as we work together and offer these practices in corporate settings, you know, we're in systems, we're in communities, right? So we are systems within systems within systems, and communities within, and so on. So embedded in a deep world and contexts. So I love, Dom, that you're mentioning that corporate context, which, you know, again, looks different in different places. And the skillful question is like, what is the way of bringing this practice into the particular corporate context or life setting in which I live? No one answer. This is why we stay in this community of practice together, and, you know, stay open to seeing what can happen. But we start with ourselves, and we now know there are ways and models for bringing these practices into those systems. And so let's just stay in this practice community together and see what can happen.
Beautiful. And so just as we end here, one thing I wanted to share with the participants, we recently created a blog on 5 mindfulness practices for difficult times. So we can certainly send those to all of you that are on this call, who are registered. And as we began this call with a practice, which is a minute to arrive, Rhonda, I would actually invite you, if you don't mind, to just help us end the call, perhaps with a different type of mindfulness exercise, perhaps something of, you know, kind or mindful intention, whatever you like, just a moment to close our time together.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. So pausing and inviting a sense of the ground beneath you in this moment. So if your feet are on the floor or buttocks in a chair, just as we breathe in and out, allowing yourself to feel the support of the ground and the breath and of life, the flow of life in you right now. So breathing in and breathing out, sensing into what is well within you, sensing into the goodness in your own heart in this moment. As you breathe in and out, mindful that the body is really, in a certain sense, so full of life, so full of the energy of life that can move us through these difficulties. Earth, water, fire, space, all in us right now, all shared, all beautifully available to help us as we struggle. So just pausing and breathing in and out, feeling the inner resources and the flow between inner and outer that this moment of practice, recognizing the elements, is meant to help remind us of. We're in it as individuals, yes, but we're in systems that are helping us thrive right now, including the system of this community. So thank you all very, very much for your being, your light, your intentions to practice and to share what you're learning. I feel gratified and grateful to be in this moment with each of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhonda. And thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for your kind time and attention today. And please stay in touch.
Thank you.
Take good care. We wish you well. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.